Iran supplies Russia with approximately 2,400 Shahed drones in 2023 alone, cheap, deadly weapons that change the calculus of Putin's war in Ukraine. Conventional wisdom says Iran needs Russia, but the data tells a different story. Russia needs Iran far more desperately than anyone realizes. If Ayatollah Khamenei falls, Putin doesn't just lose an ally. He loses his military lifeline, his diplomatic shield at the United Nations, and his gateway to challenging American dominance across the Middle East. The strategic partnership that took decades to build would collapse in weeks, and Russia's geopolitical position would crater with it. Today we're examining what happens to Putin's war machine when Tehran's regime crumbles. We'll trace how Russia became dangerously dependent on Iran, reveal the shocking extent of their military cooperation, and explore why the Kremlin views regime change in Tehran as an existential threat to Russian power. Let's start with how Putin ended up betting everything on the Ayatollahs. The foundation, from suspicion to necessity. Let's start with how these two powers went from rivals to partners. For decades, Russia and Iran eyed each other warily. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union supported communist movements that directly threatened Iran's monarchy. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Tehran's theocratic government clashed with Moscow's atheistic Soviet ideology. According to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, bilateral trade between the USSR and revolutionary Iran dropped by 67% between 1979 and 1985. The turning point came in the 1990s. Russia, economically devastated after the Soviet collapse, desperately needed cash. Iran, isolated by American sanctions, needed advanced weapons and nuclear technology. In 1995, Russia signed a contract worth $800 million to complete Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant, a project that would take 16 years to finish but established the template for future cooperation. But the real strategic partnership didn't crystallize until Syria's civil war erupted in 2011. Russia and Iran found themselves defending the same client, Bashar al-Assad. The intervention revealed something crucial to Putin. Iran could project military power across the Middle East in ways Russia couldn't. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Iran deployed approximately 20,000 fighters to Syria between 2012 and 2018, including Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps RGC forces, Hezbollah operatives, and Shia militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Russia provided air power. Iran provided boots on the ground. Together, they kept Assad in power. What this means is that both countries proved they could coordinate complex military operations thousands of miles from their borders, and that they needed each other to succeed. This brings us to the moment Putin's dependence on Iran became absolute. February 24, 2022. The military lifeline, drones, missiles, and ammunition. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Western analysts expected a swift Russian victory powered by superior firepower. Instead, Ukraine's resistance, backed by Western weapons, created a crisis Putin hadn't anticipated. Russia was running out of precision munitions. By August 2022, just 6 months into the war, Russia had expended an estimated 60% of its pre-war stockpile of precision-guided missiles, according to data from the Royal United Services Institute. Russia's defense industry, crippled by Western sanctions on microchips and advanced components, couldn't produce replacements fast enough. Production of Iskander missiles, Russia's primary tactical ballistic missile system, dropped from approximately 60 units per year before the war to fewer than 30 in 2023, as reported by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Enter Iran. In July 2022, Putin met with Khamenei in Tehran, his first trip outside the former Soviet Union since the invasion. 2 weeks later, the first Shahed 136 drones arrived in Russia. These Iranian-designed loitering munitions, essentially one-way attack drones packed with 40 kilograms of explosives, cost approximately $20,000 to produce, compared to $1.5 million for a Russian-caliber cruise missile. According to Ukrainian defense officials, Russia launched more than 3,700 Shahed drones at Ukrainian targets between September 2022 and December 2024. But Iran didn't stop at drones. Intelligence reports from the Pentagon confirm that Iran supplied Russia with Fath 360 short-range ballistic missiles starting in late 2023. These missiles, with a range of 120 kilometers, 75 miles, gave Russia the ability to strike Ukrainian cities and infrastructure without depleting its dwindling stockpile of more sophisticated weapons. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Iran transformed from a partner of convenience into the primary external supplier, keeping Russia's war machine operational. A study by the Atlantic Council found that Iranian weapons accounted for approximately 35% of Russia's strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure in winter 2023 to 2024. Perhaps most critically, Iran provides something Russia can't easily replace: artillery ammunition. Western sanctions have choked Russia's ability to import gunpowder precursor chemicals. Iranian ammunition factories operating outside the Western sanctions regime began shipping 152mm artillery shells to Russia via the Caspian Sea, a supply route that bypasses Western surveillance. While exact numbers remain classified, Ukrainian intelligence estimates Iran delivered between 300,000 and 400,000 artillery rounds to Russia in 2023 alone. But Iran's value to Putin extends far beyond the battlefield. The diplomatic shield, blocking international pressure. Let's zoom out and look at the diplomatic dimension. Russia faces unprecedented international isolation. The United Nations General Assembly voted 143-5 to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin. The European Union imposed 13 rounds of sanctions. Yet Russia continues operating with relative impunity at the United Nations Security Council, where it holds veto power. Here's where Iran becomes essential. Tehran provides Russia with access to the global South coalition that opposes Western dominance. Iran's diplomatic network spans from Venezuela to Zimbabwe, from Syria to North Korea. According to Reuters analysis, 32 countries that maintain close ties with Iran either abstained or voted against UN resolutions condemning Russia's invasion. Iran also offers Russia economic workarounds to Western sanctions. The two countries established a barter system allowing Russia to trade grain and timber for Iranian drones and ammunition. Transactions conducted in rubles and rials that bypass the SWIFT banking system controlled by Western powers. In 2023, bilateral trade between Russia and Iran increased by 17%, reaching approximately $4.3 billion, as reported by Russia's Federal Customs Service. Iran provides something else invaluable to Putin: legitimacy as a fellow victim of Western imperialism. Khamenei's anti-American rhetoric frames Russia's war in Ukraine as resistance to NATO expansion rather than territorial aggression. This narrative resonates across the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, regions where historical resentment of Western colonialism runs deep. What this reveals is that Iran functions as Russia's gateway to an alternative international order, one that challenges American hegemony without accepting Western rules. Yet this entire edifice rests on one man: Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The collapse scenario. What happens if Khamenei falls? All of this brings us to a crucial question. What happens to Putin if Iran's regime collapses? The evidence suggests Putin views this scenario as catastrophic. In November 2022, when protests against the regime spread across Iran following the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody, Russian state media launched coordinated propaganda blaming the unrest on Western interference. The Kremlin issued statements supporting Iran's sovereignty and condemning foreign attempts to destabilize the region, language typically reserved for defending Russia's own sphere of influence. Let's examine the cascading consequences Putin would face. First, the military supply chain collapses overnight. Iranian drone and missile production depends on components and expertise controlled by the IRGC. the regime's ideological enforcers. A successor government, seeking to normalize relations with the West and escape sanctions, would immediately halt weapons transfers to Russia. According to analysis by the Institute for the Study of War, Russia would lose access to approximately 200 drones per month, forcing Moscow to either reduce strike intensity or further deplete its own stockpiles. Second, Russia loses its Middle Eastern anchor. Iran hosts Russian military installations in Isfahan and Hamadan, air bases that extend Russian reach throughout the region. Iranian ports on the Persian Gulf and Caspian Sea provide Russia with naval access denied by Turkish control of the Bosphorus Strait. A pro-Western government in Tehran would evict Russian forces within months, shrinking Russia's global military footprint to its smallest extent since the 1990s. Third, the economic alternative to Western systems vanishes. Russia and Iran plan to establish a gold-backed trading currency by 2025 to further reduce dependence on the dollar. They negotiated a 20-year cooperation agreement worth potentially $40 billion, covering energy, transportation, and technology. Regime change would void these agreements, forcing Russia back into the arms of China, where Beijing dictates terms increasingly unfavorable to Moscow. But perhaps most dangerous for Putin, Iran's fall would embolden Russia's domestic opposition. If millions of Iranians can topple a theocratic dictatorship, what message does that send to Russians suffering under Putin's increasingly authoritarian rule? The Kremlin obsessively studies color revolutions, the protest movements that overthrew regimes in Ukraine, Georgia, and Kyrgyzstan. Iran's regime collapse would provide a blueprint for Russian dissidents, particularly if it happens quickly and results in democratic governance. Future scenarios, the options. So what happens next? The options break down into three distinct scenarios. Option 1. Regime survival through repression. Khamenei's regime, faced with protests, responds with overwhelming force as it did in 2009 and 2019. The IRGC crushes dissent, killing hundreds or thousands. Western nations impose additional sanctions, but stop short of direct intervention. Putin breathes easier as his critical partner survives, but the relationship becomes more costly as Iran demands higher prices for weapons and deeper Russian concessions on nuclear technology and regional influence. Probability, 50%, according to analysts at the International Crisis Group. Option 2. Managed transition. Khamenei dies, he's 85 years old, or is forced out, but the IRGC orchestrates a controlled transition to a more moderate figure who maintains the Islamic Republic's basic structure while seeking limited engagement with the West. Russia keeps its military supply lines, but faces pressure to reduce cooperation as Iran seeks sanctions relief. Putin loses influence, but avoids catastrophe. Probability, 30%, per Brookings Institution assessment. Option 3. Revolutionary collapse, widespread protests, possibly triggered by economic crisis, military defeat, or succession crisis, overwhelm security forces. The regime falls rapidly as Iran's 1979 revolution fell. A transitional government seeking Western support immediately cuts military ties with Russia and expels Russian personnel. Putin faces his nightmare scenario, losing his most important non-Chinese partner during an active war. Probability, 20%, though rising according to CSIS analysis. Each scenario carries distinct implications for Putin's ability to sustain the war in Ukraine and project power globally. Circular conclusion. So Russia invaded Ukraine confident in its military superiority, only to find itself desperately dependent on drones, missiles, and ammunition from Tehran. After examining Iran's supply of 2,400 drones in 2023, the barter systems bypassing Western sanctions, and the diplomatic shield Iran provides at the United Nations, we can see that Putin has bet his war effort and Russia's global position on the survival of Ayatollah Khamenei's regime. The Russia-Iran partnership isn't the equal alliance Moscow pretends. It's a dependency that grows more dangerous for Putin every day that Khamenei clings to power, while facing a population increasingly willing to risk everything for change. This matters because if Tehran falls, Putin doesn't just lose an ally, he loses the war. But what do you think? Could Putin actually intervene militarily to prevent regime change in Iran? Or would that overextension finally break Russia's military? Make sure to subscribe for more insightful analysis, in-depth assessments, and breaking news reports on military and geopolitical developments from around the world. Stay safe, stay informed, peace out.